Deep within the shadows of the magnificent Mole Knight Empire, a young vampire princess desired absolutely nothing more than absolute peace and quiet. Terkomari Ganda's blood had happily spent the last 3 years of her life locked completely away from the outside world as a dedicated shut-in. She dreamed of becoming a famous author, spinning tales of romance and adventure far away from the brutal reality of vampire politics. However, her peaceful sanctuary was shattered into a million pieces when her bedroom door was suddenly kicked wide open with a resounding crash. Standing in the doorway was a beautifully composed maid carrying a silver tray, looking completely unbothered by the violence of her entry. Villhaze calmly walked into the messy room, stepping over scattered papers to deliver a piece of news that would change everything. Komari wrapped her blankets tightly around her body, glaring weakly at her maid while trembling like a leaf. Without a single hint of hesitation, Villhaze announced that Komari had been officially chosen by the Empress to become a Crimson Lord. The young princess froze completely in place, knowing full well that Crimson Lords were imperial generals who constantly fought in bloody wars. To make matters worse, Komari was a vampire who absolutely could not drink blood and possessed almost zero magical capability. She tried frantically to argue against the appointment, claiming there must have been some kind of ridiculous administrative mistake. Villhaze simply shook her head, stating that the decision of the Empress was absolute and could never be reversed. Furthermore, the position required her to command the 7th Unit, a notorious squad composed entirely of murderous delinquents and rogue soldiers. If these bloodthirsty troops ever discovered that their new general was a weak, cowardly shut-in, they would undoubtedly assassinate her on the spot. Realizing that survival was her only option, Villhaze forcefully began dressing the protesting princess in her official military regalia. Within minutes, Komari was transformed into a striking image of military perfection, wearing a lavish crimson and black uniform. Villhaze adjusted the collar of the uniform, whispering words of absolute devotion into her master's ear. With heavy steps and a heart pounding like a bass drum, Komari was escorted down the grand corridors of the military headquarters. She could hear the raucous shouting and violent clashing of weapons echoing from behind the massive doors of the assembly hall. Villhaze stepped forward and pushed the doors open, revealing a chaotic room packed with dozens of heavily armed rowdy soldiers. Immediately, a massive brute of a rebel soldier stepped forward, openly mocking the small stature of their new general. Komari wanted to turn around and run away screaming, but her legs were completely frozen in sheer, unadulterated terror. The arrogant rebel drew a massive broadsword, swinging it aggressively through the air to intimidate the young princess. In a sudden clumsy panic, Komari tripped over her own oversized cape, stumbling forward with her hands flailing wildly. Her hand accidentally caught the hilt of the ceremonial sword at her waist, drawing it in an unpredictable sweeping arc. By complete and utter coincidence, the blade connected perfectly with the rebel's neck, instantly decapitating him in one clean stroke. Because vampires in this world possess incredible regeneration, the severed head simply bounced into the air and began yelling in frustration. The entire assembly hall fell into a stunned, dead silence as the soldiers stared at the tiny girl who had just executed a giant with ease. Seizing the perfect opportunity, Villhaze stepped forward and proudly proclaimed that Komari had defeated the rebel without even trying. Realizing she had to play along to survive, Komari put on the haughtiest expression she could muster, masking her intense inner panic. The brutal soldiers immediately erupted into wild cheers, suddenly convinced that their new leader was a ruthless, cold-blooded tactical genius. However, there was no time to celebrate, as news arrived that a massive enemy force was already advancing toward their border. Komari was immediately forced to lead her chaotic army directly onto the battlefield, her mind screaming in absolute despair. Looking down from the ridge, she saw thousands of heavily armored enemy troops marching in perfect, terrifying formation. Her own troops looked back at her eagerly, waiting for their brilliant new Crimson Lord to give the command to charge. Terrified of revealing her complete weakness, Komari delivered a grandiose, arrogant speech, telling her troops to stand completely still. She claimed that she would destroy the entire enemy army with a secret tactical plan that they could not possibly comprehend. In reality, her overly devoted maid Villhaze had spent the entire previous night burying thousands of highly volatile magical landmines across the valley. As the unsuspecting enemy army marched into the center of the valley, they stepped directly onto the hidden trap. A series of cataclysmic magical explosions instantly erupted across the plain, sending dirt, light, and armored bodies flying everywhere. The 7th unit watched in absolute awe as the entire opposing army was completely decimated within a matter of seconds without they themselves taking a single step. They instantly began chanting Komari's name, thoroughly convinced that their general possessed the ultimate tactical mind in the entire world. Komari simply stood there sweating profusely, nodding along while secretly thanking the heavens that her ridiculous bluff had actually worked. Villhaze stood by her side, smiling softly with a gaze full of terrifyingly intense admiration for her beloved princess. Little did Komari know, this accidental victory had just caught the attention of some incredibly dangerous individuals across the empire. Her name was now known to every ruthless warlord, and her peaceful days as a shut-in rider were officially gone forever. The terrifying memory of her unexpected battlefield victory continued to haunt Terkomari's fragile mind during the quiet hours of the night. She stared down at her trembling hands, wishing more than anything that she could just disappear into the pages of her unwritten romance novels. Every sudden creak of the old vampire manor made her small shoulders tense up with absolute dread. Her devoted maid Villhaze was usually there to comfort her, but the hallway outside remained completely silent. Suddenly, a chilling breeze swept through the room, extinguishing the single candle on her nightstand. A menacing figure stepped out from the deep shadows, her malicious smirk gleaming in the pale moonlight. Komari instantly recognized the cruel eyes of Millicent Shawl, a terrifying ghost from her traumatic past. Millicent chuckled softly, mocking the young Crimson Lord's obvious displays of cowardice. Komari tried to call out for help, but her voice caught in her throat as she choked on her own fear. Millicent revealed that she had already taken Villhaze hostage to lure Komari into a deadly trap. The thought of her precious maid being harmed sent a sharp jolt of adrenaline through Komari's frail body. With a dramatic swirl of her dark cloak, Millicent vanished into the night air, leaving behind a mocking invitation. The lingering scent of sulfur and old magic confirmed that this was not just a horrible nightmare. Forfeiting her usual safety, the young princess threw on her crimson military coat and sprinted out of the manor. The cold night wind whipped against her face as she rushed blindly into the dense foggy woods. Every shadow in the forest seemed to morph into a terrifying beast waiting to tear her apart. Her lungs burned from the heavy exertion, but the image of Villhaze's smile kept her moving forward. Ahead, the crumbling silhouette of a ruined Gothic chapel loomed ominously over the dead landscape. Komari approached the heavy rusted iron doors, her heart pounding violently against her ribs. With a loud groan of metal, the doors swung inward to reveal Villhaze bound in glowing magical chains. Villhaze looked up and cried out, begging her beloved mistress to turn back before it was too late. High above on a broken stone balcony, Millicent stepped forward with a cruel, triumphant laugh. She declared that Komari's reputation was nothing but a sham, and that her execution would happen tonight. Komari froze as Millicent summoned a barrage of sharp crystalline magical spears in the air. With a swift flick of her wrist, Millicent sent the lethal projectiles raining down toward the helpless princess. Komari dove across the stone floor, barely avoiding the explosive impact of the magical lances. She scrambled behind a fallen stone pillar, weeping softly as she clutched her bruised elbows. Millicent mocked her cowardice, unleashing another shockwave that shattered Komari's flimsy hiding spot. The pillar exploded into 1,000 pieces, throwing Komari violently across the ruined chapel floor. She landed hard against the steps of the altar, a sharp piece of debris cutting her cheek open. Seeing her beloved mistress bleeding, Villhaze violently strained against her magical bonds, screaming out in rage. Millicent slowly jumped down from the balcony, landing gracefully near the weakened blonde vampire. In a final act of pure devotion, Villhaze managed to break one arm free and smeared a drop of pure vampire blood onto Komari's lips. The instant the taste of blood registered in Komari's mind, a violent shudder ran through her entire body. A deep resonant hum echoed through the stone walls as an ancient dormant power finally awakened within her. Millicent stumbled backward, her smug confidence instantly evaporating as she felt the overwhelming pressure. Komari unleashed a deafening scream as the devastating core implosion power erupted from her body. The shockwave tore through the chapel walls, obliterating the ancient stone architecture into dust. Millicent was sent flying through the air, coughing up blood as the raw kinetic force shattered her armor. As the smoke cleared, Komari stood amidst the total destruction with a cold, uncharacteristic gaze, completely untamed. Villhaze, now free from the destroyed chains, watched her mistress in absolute awe and slight terror. From the burning shadows nearby, a heavily wounded Melisande dragged herself away, whispering a dark promise of revenge. Suddenly the crimson aura faded, and Komari collapsed heavily into the dust, losing consciousness instantly. Villhaze rushed to her side, gathering the fragile blonde girl into her protective arms. But the massive explosion had caught the attention of far more dangerous entities watching from the dark. In the capital city, a sinister tournament invitation was already being stamped with the blood-red seal of the Crimson Lords. The devastating nature of her hidden power would no longer remain a secret from the rival warlords. A new calculated plot was already unfolding to drag the young princess into a brutal war tournament against her will. The ominous decree for the multi-sided Crimson Lords war tournament arrived on a dark parchment sealed with blood-red wax. Komari desperately clutched her head as she realized her peaceful shut-in lifestyle was slipping away completely. Villhaze stepped forward silently, adjusting her black maid headband before presenting a freshly ironed imperial uniform. The young princess reluctantly allowed her loyal maid to drape the heavy, intimidating coat over her small shoulders. Thousands of rough vampire soldiers gathered in the colossal stone coliseum, chanting their commander's name at the top of their lungs. Komari trembled violently as she stepped onto the high stone balcony overlooking the chaotic sea of bloodthirsty warriors. Across the wide arena floor stood Eidolon Metal, his massive frame wrapped in spiky black iron armor that pulsed with dark energy. Standing directly behind the cruel warlord was Sukuna, her pale hands trembling as she clutched an old magical tome against her chest. Eidolon roughly grabbed the young orphan girl by her shoulder, whispering malicious commands straight into her ear. Komari noticed the blatant manipulation from afar, a rare spark of genuine anger flashing across her crimson eyes. A loud brass horn echoed throughout the stadium, signaling the official commencement of the chaotic multi-sided battle. Hundreds of aggressive enemy soldiers charged forward instantly, their heavy weapons clashing together in a deafening uproar. Villhaze immediately leaped from the high balcony, deploying dozens of hidden magical throwing knives mid-air. Komari quickly ducked behind a thick stone pillar to avoid a stray magical blast that shattered the railing nearby. Eidolon raised his heavy gauntlets, casting a massive dark spell that forced Sukuna into an involuntary trance. Tears streamed down Sukuna's face as her hands involuntarily opened the ancient book, releasing a wave of destructive psychic energy. The powerful shockwave rippled through the entire stadium, instantly knocking over dozens of heavily armored soldiers. Villhaze was pushed back several meters, her boots digging deep furrows into the dusty ground as she protected the path to Komari. Eidolon laughed maniacally as a towering wall of solid steel plates materialized from the earth to form an absolute defense. Komari looked over the edge and saw the helpless Sukuna collapsing to her knees from utter exhaustion. Overcoming her intense cowardice, the blonde princess stepped out from her hiding spot and prepared to leap directly into the fray. She closed her eyes and jumped, free-falling through the chaotic airspace toward the center of the iron fortress. Villhaze swiftly threw a specialized magical thread to safely catch her princess right before she hit the hard ground. Eidolon sneered as he noticed the small princess standing right outside his impenetrable barrier of jagged metal. A stray slash from an enemy soldier accidentally grazed Komari's cheek, causing a single brilliant drop of blood to trickle down. As the drop of pure vampire blood reached her lips, a sudden, explosive surge of ancient magical energy ignited within her. The core implosion state was triggered, instantly turning the sky above into a swirling vortex of multicolored flames. Her long twin tails began a powerful hair color shifting transformation, shifting violently from bright blonde to an ethereal snowy white. Eidolon stepped back in utter disbelief as the overwhelming pressure from her transformation began to dent his iron walls. Sukuna opened her eyes weakly, staring through the cracks at the magnificent white-haired savior floating slightly off the ground. Komari raised her right hand slowly, a massive, ornate sword of pure concentrated energy materializing directly above her head. With a sharp downward motion, she swung the cataclysmic blade straight into Eidolon's ultimate steel defense. The colossal steel plates shattered completely into a million tiny shards of burning metal that scattered across the stadium. Eidolon was thrown backward violently, his heavy spiked armor cracking wide open as he crashed hard against the stone stands. The intense magical aura gradually faded away, and Komari's hair shifted smoothly back to its original bright blonde color. Realizing what she had just done in front of thousands of witnesses, the young princess immediately began to sweat in panic. The entire Colosseum erupted into a deafening cheer, completely misinterpreting her absolute panic as a display of supreme dominance. Villhaze quickly arrived at her side, gently dusting off the crimson imperial coat with a highly satisfied expression. Sukuna approached them slowly on trembling legs, bowing her head deeply to express her profound gratitude to her savior. Suddenly, the bright sky split wide open as a massive, ominous golden magical gateway materialized high above the stadium. A booming voice echoed from the gateway, announcing that a global war had just been declared across all neighboring nations. A booming voice echoed from the gateway, announcing that a global war had just been declared across all neighboring nations. Terkomari immediately dropped her ceremonial sword, her knees shaking as sirens began to wail throughout the capital city. Villhaze caught the falling weapon effortlessly, stepping forward to shield her trembling mistress from the gathering crowd of soldiers. Sudden explosions shook the northern horizon, sending massive pillars of purple smoke billowing into the darkening atmosphere. Messengers ran frantically through the corridors, shouting that President Matter's elite experimental army had crossed the border. Out on the distant battlefield, President Matter smiled coldly from his mechanical command airship while reviewing his mechanical troops. Thousands of synthetic cybernetic soldiers marched in perfect unison, their red glowing visors cutting through the thick smoke. Terkomari clutched her head in the war room, listening to the disastrous tactical updates pouring in from every single front. Her volatile troops cheered loudly outside her window, completely convinced that their brilliant Crimson Lord was formulating a master plan. "I just want to go home and write my novels," Komari screamed internally while staring at her blank parchment paper. Suddenly, the reinforced stained glass window shattered completely, and a vibrant figure crashed into the center of the room. Princess Nilia Cunningham stood up smoothly from the debris, brushing glass off her magnificent blue and gold battle armor. Terkomari scrambled backward over her desk, pointing a shaking finger at the uninvited foreign princess. "We need an alliance right now, Crimson Lord, because Matter intends to wipe out both of our nations," Nilia declared firmly. Villhaze inspected Nilia critically, slowly lowering her hidden daggers once she verified the princess's genuine intent. Komari tried to refuse the dangerous proposition, but Nilia quickly grabbed her by the collar and dragged her toward the open balcony. Below them, the massive experimental army of President Matter had finally breached the valley's secondary defensive walls. Giant mechanical tripods fired searing green laser beams, instantly vaporizing the stone battlements and defensive towers. "If we do not combine our magical energies immediately, everything we know will turn to ash," Nilia urged, holding out her hand. Terkomari looked at the weeping citizens in the lower city, and a sudden spark of genuine courage flared within her heart. She stepped forward resolutely, placing her small hand into Nilia's calloused palm with absolute finality. Nilia drew a small ceremonial dagger, slicing her palm before gently pressing it against Komari's sharp vampire fangs. The moment the drop of blood touched Komari's tongue, her eyes flared into a brilliant, blinding shade of crimson. A massive aura of pure golden and red energy erupted from the two girls, shattering the stone floor beneath their feet. Villhaze watched from the doorway, a look of profound ecstatic pride washing over her elegant features. Up in the sky, the clouds parted violently as a massive celestial sword made of pure golden light began to materialize. From his command airship, President Matter watched the radar screen shatter from the sheer magnitude of the sudden magical output. "Fire all cannons immediately, destroy that manifestation at all costs," Matter screamed at his automated mechanical crew. Hundreds of experimental missiles launched simultaneously, creating a dense web of smoke trails heading straight for the balcony. Komari and Nilia raised their joined hands toward the heavens, guiding the colossal golden blade with their synchronized wills. With a shared resounding battle cry, they brought their arms down, swinging the massive sword of light toward the enemy army. The celestial golden blade sliced through the incoming missile volley, detonating them harmlessly in a massive chain of explosions. The sword struck the center of the battlefield, releasing a colossal shockwave of pure magical energy that swept across the plains. Every single cybernetic soldier and experimental tank touched by the light instantly short-circuited and dissolved into sparkling dust particles. President Matter's command airship was caught in the magical gale, its engines failing completely as it drifted helplessly out of the airspace. As the blinding light slowly faded, a quiet, chaotic peace finally descended over the completely saved landscape. Terkomari immediately collapsed onto the floor from pure exhaustion, her hair reverting back to its original blonde color. Nelia laughed heartily, sitting down right next to her and offering a warm, genuine smile of mutual respect. Thousands of vampire soldiers surged into the courtyard below, chanting Komari's name louder than they ever had before. Villhaze gently draped a warm blanket over Komari's shoulders, whispering that her favorite tea was waiting for her inside. Though she would never get her quiet shut-in life back, Terkomari smiled faintly, knowing she had finally found a true place to belong.